Well, hello there, and welcome to the recording of a brand new episode of Search Marketing Scoop, the podcast brought to you by Semrush. This is a little informal introduction before we get going with a proper podcast recording. So, hello again. There's a lot of things that have happened over the last couple of weeks or so since we've done the last show. So a lot of great topics that we're going to talk about. And of course, as usual, I'm joined by two cracking guests today, one search, paid search specialist and one organic search specialist. So we'll be meeting them just in a couple of minutes' time. But in the meantime, why don't you just say a little hello yourself? So we're starting to get some viewers watching. So welcome if you're watching us live. And if you're watching us live, tell us in the world where you happen to be from. Are you from the States? Are you from the UK? Are you from Australia and up in the middle of the night? Are you from India? Are you from somewhere else? Tell us where you happen to be watching us from. And also just tell us maybe a little bit about yourself and your roles, what you tend to focus on. Are you a paid search specialist? Are you an organic search specialist? Are you a general digital marketer? We've got Ed from London. We've got Luke from California. Hello from Boston. Mark 8, Connect Insurance Brokers. The mighty Stoke indeed. Great. We've got some interaction going already. So we've got 32 people watching live now. I'm sure we'll at least double in number over the next couple of minutes there. Ethan Eldridge, Colorado, USA. Kyle. So there's too many people chatting now. Or the chat's going. Stop chatting. You're chatting too much. No, don't stop chatting. Deirdre from Ireland. It's wonderful to have you all here. Milwaukee PPC all the way. Joe Martinez. Hello, Joe. Are you PPC all the way, or are you SEO all the way, or is it possible to be just one way in terms of digital marketing? So welcome again. It's great to have you all here. Now, one thing that has happened, just to give away one of the topics over the last couple of days almost, is there's been a Google algorithm update. So I'll share my screen with you, and you can see that in the Semrush sensor tool from the 1st, 2nd, and the 3rd of August, there's been a lot of flux going on in terms of different rankings. We're going to have a guest on that's going to be discussing that and a few other things as well. We can see there's quite a bit of flux in news, but there usually is there as well. You can break it down by category. So that's a decent tool to be looking at just to see where the changes are. And I like looking at these areas down here as well, just to see exactly where the biggest changes happened, whether it was on the carousel. You can also see the paid search, so it wasn't the top ads, because of course, if there's many more top ads, then that can impact whether or not your organic listing actually appears above or below the fold. So lots of interesting stuff happening there. We've got Hong Kong in the house. Hiya from Oregon as well. Cindy Firestone, JYH from Hong Kong. Welcome. More people arriving all the time. It's great to have you here. So I reckon we should just about get started with the recording of the podcast. Now, it's an audio podcast that we're recording here on YouTube. You can subscribe to Semrush YouTube channel, of course, but if you want to subscribe to the audio podcast, you can do that just by searching for Search Marketing Scoop in iTunes or your favorite podcasting platform, if you have another flavored device apart from iPhone. So I reckon we should start the proper introduction before it goes too downhill here. So let's me just get a couple of things lined up here. We'll make sure we get all the funky intro music ready to go, and let's start recording. Google releases a broad core algorithm update. You can now add as many as 8 custom parameters in Google Ads. Google drops its public submission feature, and you'll soon be no longer having the option of excluding all mobile apps from display campaigns. Broadcasting live on the Semrush YouTube channel, this is Search Marketing Scoop, the Semrush show that brings together the top PPC and SEO folk to discuss the current search headlines and how they impact you. Hi, I'm your host, David Bain. Let us meet today's guests. First up, a Whovian who does her crossroads in pen. Crosswords in pen. Indeed, that's what
Either way.
She's the director of client services at Clicks Marketing. Welcome to the Scoop, Michelle Morgan.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Michelle. And next up, a man who tried to ensure that his clients do some of the easy grunt work themselves. He is the founder of Wiedemann Consulting Group. Welcome, Steve Wiedemann.
David, good to be here.
Thank you for joining us, Steve. If you try to be funny with your intro note, David, try and get it right. But anyway, let's stick with Steve for story number one, and that is Google released a broad core algorithm update with big SERP volatility. That was seen from August the 1st to the 3rd. So, Steve, what kind of sites were affected with this one?
So yeah, it was actually really interesting pulling up all the the accounts that we have access to. We're looking at industries including like logistics, storage companies, e-commerce sites, as well as multi-location, just to kind of see what types of sites were impacted. We have one account as well that's editorial, and what it feels like in looking at the data, and I still think it's probably still a little too early. I know the rollouts are still just kind of happening. They're supposed to kind of taper off this week, but it really feels like queries that are hybrid, informational and transactional were the most impacted. Like product categories of an e-commerce site seem to be a little impacted, where the product detail pages or product landing pages, however you want to call it, seem less affected. Winners really were those that were heavy and unique short answer style content above the fold on a mobile device, such as like a very slim top bar on a mobile, and followed by maybe just a H1 tag and some text without a lot of advertising or interstitials or hero banners or that sort of thing. When we kind of compare up pages that dropped a little bit versus pages that didn't. So so far that seems to be one of the trends. And again, that's a lot of it's redundant content above that fold line on mobile, where the individual pages that seem to be impacted, which seems a little bit unfair, because a user looking at a product category may really be looking just to buy a product, and now have to look at a page and feel like they're looking at an article or a blog post, is a little less intuitive, I think. So the fact that Google is giving a little more preference to product categories that have a lot of heavy text at the top on mobile doesn't seem fair to those people who are really more in the purchase phase, even though they're on a category and not a product detail.
Okay, so just to clarify, product category pages were winners in this situation.
The opposite. I think product categories were impacted negatively, and the product detail pages seemed pretty stable.
And do you think it was pages with a lot of content, with a lot of unique content on them, that were negatively affected?
No. I think the ones that when I looked at the individual pages, the category pages on some of these sites that had the impact, it looked like those that had text above the products. Again, thinking mobile only, right? Were the ones that seemed to be the most positively impacted. Those that had products at the top and text at the bottom seemed to be the ones that were negatively impacted. So, and again, it seems unfair, because again, a buyer might want to see products right away, and they get to a product page when you're doing a search for, say, I don't know, a particular brand of luxury watch, and you go out to that page, and all you see is a big headline and some text, and you don't see any products. You're kind of like, wait a minute, am I actually on a store, or am I reading an article? And that's why it's confusing. So I imagine that this update, as click-through behaviors kind of kick in, I imagine that over the next couple of weeks that it'll self-adjust, and it'll kind of go back to where it was, at least for that type of content. The other one I noticed heavily was like the editorial sites, where it's heavy in editorial, and they're paying a lot of attention to things that are important to mobile users, like page speed and sort of best practice, as Danny Sullivan called it, broader important factors. It looked like those editorial sites were the ones also impacted. Those that had a lot of sort of redundant fluff at the top, like a lot of share buttons and things that aren't really the content the user was looking for, and they've got to scroll a bit to see that content. Those pages were highly impacted. One site was a healthcare site in particular, and it gets quite a bit of traffic, and it had like a 40% drop. And a lot of that was because the above the fold content was a little bit repetitive and not helpful to solving the the user's query. The pages that actually performed really well when we look at who now ranks in the top position for a keyword that this particular domain did. You look at it, and there's this top thin bar, which is your nav bar and your logo, a nice clear H1, and then some short answer or list text right there without having to see any kind of scrolling. Those pages seem to be just crushing it right now. So I wonder again if it's going to kind of roll back a little bit, or scale back a little bit after kind of the click and stay user behavior signals start to come back in. I feel like every time there's a big update, Google sort of shakes the Etch-a-Sketch a bit, right? And I think what happens over time is people start to use and interact with the results, and some of those good results that might have dropped off will start to come back because those users were specifically looking for that, or or were looking for a certain type of content. So I think that's
the
where we
important
saw the
question is, for those listeners under 30, what is an Etch-a-Sketch?
So yeah, it's just a big toy we had when we were kids that you could draw pictures on by spinning a little wheel, and you shake it up and you get to start all over. So,
like an iPad with magnets, kind of.
Oh my God, I feel so old now. Thanks.
But I love your response there, Steve, because you've obviously done a lot of research into that, and I was particularly interested in these kind of product category pages where you're right that people clicking through to a product category would naturally want to see a list of products within that category. But if Google are being more kind to pages that have a bit of text or a significant amount of text above that, that's a significant challenge for major e-commerce sites, especially if that's something that's going to stay. I can't think off the top of my head a way to create a decent user experience out of that. I mean, have you got major concerns about that?
I don't really have concerns about it, because I think it'll go back to the users finding what they were looking for.
Yeah.
I think that little pogo sticking that's going to happen with these post update changes are going to sort of fix themselves in a way. When I was looking at that healthcare site, again, I know it's not an e-commerce example, but I think this is a huge opportunity for a lot of sites that do editorial content to really push down a lot of the elements that aren't really as helpful to users. When I looked at kind of side by side, I noticed that one site had some mobile usability issues to work out, like having autocomplete attributes on forms, and using the correct tap target sizes for buttons and things like that. Both sites were HTTPS. Both sites monetized affiliate links, but one of them put the disclaimer at the top where the user sees it first. One of them had it sort of below the fold. The one that actually won had it below the fold. Neither of the two, when I was kind of comparing up, had AMP pages. So the one editorial site that wasn't healthcare, it was more BuzzFeed type site, had an AMP feature, and it was just crushing it. And then that side-by-side analysis, again, as the list goes, the winning sites had kind of all business above the fold, right, and no ads, clear H1, and short answer, short list, which may allude to some of the things that Google's thinking about with voice and feature answer boxes. The losing site had a lot of redundant modules and disclaimers. Losing site had, going to my little list here, losing site had quite a few affiliate links as well. The winning site actually had more outbound links to, say, .gov and .edu references, which I thought was really interesting as well.
Old school SEO.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting.
Well, thank you so much. This conversation could go on this particular topic and just focus in on this. And sorry, Michelle, it was nice to have you on here, but no, I mean, we're
great, guys. Glad I could help.
We're definitely going to go to you now. And story number 2 is you can now add as many as 8 custom parameters in Google Ads. This is thanks to the October deadline to migrate to parallel tracking. So, Michelle, first of all, what's parallel tracking?
Yeah, so the parallel tracking piece is something that Google has been doing it mostly started to try and get quicker page load times on mobile. So what they're trying to do is basically separating your tracking parameters from your landing page URL itself. Right now, it basically all functions in kind of a linear fashion where everything, your page and tracking and all that kind of stuff loads at the same time. What they're doing with this parallel tracking piece is basically saying, we're going to load just your page when somebody clicks on it, so that if you're on like Wi-Fi or 3G or LTE someplace, that page will load much quicker. And then we're going to load your tracking parameters and all that kind of stuff in the background on a different page. They will, or not necessarily a different page, but in a different way. They will still fire. They will still track in the same way that everything has before, assuming that you've gone through and done your due diligence. But it's meant to be a good thing, because page load time can be something that, although is probably more of an SEO factor, can be something that impacts your PPC campaigns, especially if you're on those mobile devices away from reliable internet, something along those lines. So it kind of gives a little bit of a boost to those mobile pages to be able to load quicker while your tracking parameters load in the background.
Got you. So Google were concerns beforehand about the number of parameters that you had in the URL that could slow down the page load time. And obviously now that the page is loading first and then the tracking, the parameters, other things are loading afterwards, then it's not so much of an issue for paid load time. So they're giving you the option of adding more parameters to their ads. How are people going to use these 8 custom parameters? Is that seems like overkill, or are people actually going to be using them all?
Yeah, I think the same thing. I think for the most part, it's overkill. I find that there are, most of the people I talk to don't really use the custom parameters. I know that I use custom parameters on at least some of the accounts I work with that utilize Marin, because Marin uses the custom parameters to have a click ID, and that's how they get tracking, hence the third-party tracking pieces, that sort of thing. So that's one way you can use them. They can be used to basically create your own set of tags if you don't want to have something that's wholly within the UTM thing. You want to be able to break out a little bit, get a little bit more custom. You can set those up and have it be kind of a new set of dynamic tags that relies on you doing the framework beforehand, where you can pull in campaign name, and it's not actually the interface campaign name, it's what you assign it at the campaign level. So these are something that I feel like are more of a very specific use case. It seems like everybody that I talk to either uses them quite a bit, or they don't even know how they work because they don't use them at all. Anyone that I've talked to that does use them, it doesn't seem like the idea of having 8 versus 3 is a huge groundbreaker. My guess is that people loved having 3 in the first place, so they just kind of ran with it. I'm sure there are some people out there who wanted to have more from the get-go, but now you've got a little bit more room to play. If you want to add some additional things on there that you're not currently tracking, it can be an extra way to get more data, more layers of different pieces. You can maybe tag things a couple different ways. But for the most part, this seems like a thing that is kind of cool, and Google can say, here we've more than doubled the amount you can have, but I don't think for most people it's really going to have an impact.
So you wouldn't say there's any competitive advantage to going out there and saying, wow, I can now have 8 custom parameters, let's go out and use them all. And they're going to get data back that's so much more valuable than the data that the competitors get.
So in some ways, yes. I mean, you can do that if you set things up in such a way that the data that you get is so much better that it allows you to now optimize your campaigns better. I don't think it's necessarily the fact that your competitors can't have that data. It's just what you choose to put in those parameters, because they are very customizable to what you want and what you need. So I don't know if it's necessarily a competitive advantage outside of just the idea of, are you managing your campaigns better than the other people are in the first place?
Great. Okay. Well, let's go back to Steve for story number 3. And as Google drops its public submission feature. So Google shared in a tweet, we've had to drop the public submission feature, but we continue to welcome your submissions using the usual tool in Search Console and through sitemaps directly. So is this a big thing that's happened here, Steve?
You know, it's interesting because Google's so big on privacy, and they're taking away a tool that allows you to have some privacy and requiring you to register and use Search Console. If that's kind of what the folks that don't want to register for some reason are thinking, I think a lot of the SEOs out there were using that tool to submit pages that link to them to try to get those pages indexed quickly. So I think those people who are concerned could sort of rest easy knowing there's other ways to get those pages indexed. One of the things that we do that's very easy is just add a link to whatever that page is in one of your recent blog posts, for example. So if you want a page index, just link to that page in a blog post, even just briefly link that blog post to your homepage. Google's going to crawl from your homepage to that blog to index that page, and then you're fine. So I think there's ways that you can get pages that are linking to you to get indexed quickly without having to use that tool. So seeing it go away, having not used it in years, like most of us, I don't think there's anything to worry about.
Yes, yeah, the submit your site to whatever search engine tool seems very much 10, 15 years ago rather than actually nowadays.
Exactly.
Yes. But it probably brings us on to also discuss what kind of tools do you use or should you use to ensure that your site is crawled on a regular basis and that all your new pages that you do publish are actually indexed by Google? I mean, for instance, an XML sitemap, should every site, big or small, be using an XML sitemap?
Sure. So if you have one page and you're submitting an XML that says I have one page, and your page is already indexed because you've done a site operator, site:yourdomain.com, and you see your page index, you really don't need an XML sitemap. I think the only extra benefit for sites that are less than, say, 5-10 pages is if you're doing a video XML sitemap where you can apply additional keyword attributes like tags and keywords and titles and things like that. I think there's a value there if you're submitting a video XML. But if your site has less than 10 pages, you really don't need an XML file. What you do, again, is run that site operator, make sure that your pages are indexed. The other thing that I would do too is set up a Google alert before you publish a piece of content so that you can get alerted when Google has that page indexed. And that'll kind of give you a little bit of a hint of how long it's taking for your posts and pages to get indexed.
Great. We've got Craig Campbell saying in the chat, not much chat going on here. Everyone's saying hi and then being quiet after that. Craig, what have you been up to this week yourself? What do you think of Google's latest update? Has that affected anything that you've done recently? Is there anything else that you've been up to that you'd like to share in the chat? It'd be good to hear from you. But maybe just lastly in this particular point, Steve, what about fetch and submit inside Search Console? Is that a tool that is a bit stealthy but can be really effective to use?
I love the fetch tool because it tells you a lot about response codes and things that Google's seeing as it crawls the page. In terms of using it for indexing, again, there's so many other ways that you can get a page indexed. I really don't use it for that so much. I know it makes publishers feel better when they do something new and they use the fetch tool and then click the add to index button. And if it gives you a little bit of that peace of mind, great. But in 99% of cases, you really don't need it other than just to troubleshoot. If your page is showing something different to users versus to Google. So I think using the fetch tool to troubleshoot, I think is still a helpful feature. Using it to get pages indexed, probably not.
Okay, so essentially what you're saying is if you're finding that you're trying to use it to get pages indexed, the chances are your SEO isn't that good because you don't have adequate links, you don't have adequate traffic flowing to those pages to encourage Google to actually get those pages ranked to begin with. And you should probably be looking elsewhere rather than doing that all the time.
Right. If you link it to your homepage, whatever the page is that you want to get indexed, if you link it to your homepage, most of the time, that page is going to get refreshed very quickly. If you're still feeling like, hey, there's something going on, I'm not getting this page indexed no matter what I do, linking it, whatever, using that submit to index tool might give you a little more peace of mind. And I don't have any data proving one way or the other, but other SEOs have said, when I use that fetch tool after making a change, it updates the cache a little bit quicker. But
Great.
I haven't seen it personally.
Well, the final story goes to Michelle, and that is you'll soon no longer have the option to exclude all mobile apps from display campaigns. So, Michelle, what is happening here? I see you shaking your head there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is another one of those things where Google is looking to simplify things in such a way that really aggravates all of us advertisers who've been doing this for a while, because it mostly means that they are taking away our granularity and our control levels for sake of making things technically easier, just meaning that there's less you can do on it, right? So basically what they're doing, and there's been lots of back and forth on this because people have interpreted the things differently. If you need a refresher, there's Search Engine Land article. It's got most of the stuff covered on it. But there is basically what's happening is that you will not be able to exclude mobile apps in the way that you used to do it if you want to be able to target mobile users on the Google Display Network. What we used to do is there was a little workaround. It was AdSense for mobileapps.com, I think was the URL. And if you added that as a negative placement in your excluded placements on your Google Display Network campaigns, it meant that you could still target people on mobile web, but you would not target mobile apps. This is going away, and they are saying that if you target mobile, you are all in for apps and web, which from my experience, the experience of everybody that I have talked to at this point, mobile apps, unless you are promoting another app, just don't really work well in terms of trying to get people to come to your site, give you revenue, especially not for B2B. They're terrible for B2B. So it's something that I think for seasoned advertisers, Google's probably going to lose a lot of our ad spend from the Google Display Network if we can't exclude those people well. For smaller advertisers, honestly, it's something they need to pay attention to. You might miss it. You might notice that your Google Display Network campaigns just stop performing. And it could be just because of the inclusion of mobile apps. So there are a couple things that Google is giving us to be able to try and get around this. You can exclude certain topics and categories to try and narrow things down. Like a lot of apps are games, right? So you can exclude game categories, that sort of thing, to try and head that off. The only other way to this point that it sounds like you can exclude mobile apps is to literally have a list of all of the mobile apps that you want to exclude and add each as a negative placement. And there are countless numbers of apps out there that are within the Google Display Network. So this is going to be a tall task if you want to go this route. So there is still some granularity there, but overall, we're being opted into apps on the GDN, whether we like it or not.
Wow. Okay. I think I'm going to ask you to follow up just on that, just in a second, in terms of is there anything that people should be doing proactively to improve the way that their ads are actually displaying or likely to convert on apps, and perhaps there might be some other way of, I guess, defining which apps are the most popular apps in terms of traffic and most likely to cause them the greatest ad spend. But just before we go to that question, I just want to alert Steve to another couple of questions. So we're getting a few comments and questions in the chat now, and it's probably a little bit more organic related. So one is from Amber Stanley Cruth saying, what new features of Search Console are you excited about? And we've also got JL Favorio, who's talking about using Google Search Console to index new quality pages quicker. As soon as I publish, he's finding that he gets indexed within an hour or so. So he's saying he likes that tool there. So have a little think about those couple of points there, Steve. And
Sure.
just before we get your thoughts on that, we'll just go back to Michelle. Michelle, have you got any maybe final tips in relation to what we're talking about there, and what an advertiser could do to try and reduce their ineffective spend? Or is this something that people are just going to have to learn and evolve over the coming few months?
Yeah, so I would say if you want to continue to use mobile on the GDN, I would say dip your toe in, maybe give a big hefty mobile bid modifier decrease on those campaigns to still get some volume through, but not at big levels. You can then see which apps are going to take up most of your spend right away. You can exclude those. I think there's also, don't quote me on it, but I think there's also kind of a push for the PPC chat community to put together just a communal list of apps that people can go in and exclude the URL. So we're working on that, I believe. So that might be something to hop in and just grab all of that. But otherwise, it's going to be basically don't dive into the deep end. Don't let all of your budget be spent on it right away. Cut your mobile budget, maybe even break out a mobile display network campaign separate and be able to optimize there based on what performance looks like.
Great tips. Steve, have you got any thoughts in terms of Google Search Console and any new things that are happening there?
Absolutely. And Michelle, I got a great link bait idea for you. If you published a page on your site that said list of apps or URLs to exclude, and then
I'm going to do that.
around that. I would link to that for sure.
I like it.
I really like in Search Console. I really like the new URL inspection tool. I think there's a lot of attributes they really didn't share previously that makes that particular tool really fun. I also like the fact that we get a lot of data now, like 18 months of data, and we can do some really fun reports and filters in Search Console and the new Search Console. I'm excited to hopefully see them port all the other features over, so we don't have to keep toggling between the two. And then I think you mentioned a little bit about the indexing tool, and I think that's great that it's working for those folks that are seeing a difference. But again, I think just adding that link to your homepage if you want to get a page indexed quickly, in most cases, is good enough.
There's a lot of chat suddenly happening now, so we're just coming towards the end of our episode. So maybe if you're lucky, Michelle or Steve might jump into the chat as well. But we've got Lindo Cedar Holmes saying we changed our Facebook URL and the page went from page 1 on Google to disappearing altogether. So I guess that's fairly interesting. You would hope that Facebook would be perceived as a fairly authoritative domain and that you could regain those rankings quite quickly. Steve, do you have any experience or thoughts on changing a Facebook page organic traffic to the page?
I think everything levels out over time. If you see a drop after a big update, it usually kind of corrects itself if the page is helpful to begin with. If pages, teeth grinding, I think, and waiting for that ranking
distribution. Nice name. AdWords has been pushing eCPC and utilization of similar audiences. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so AdWords is big into the enhanced CPC bidding model, decrease your bids based on what it thinks the likelihood of conversion is. I am 100% in the camp of you should test this for each of your campaigns. I have seen it do really good things on some campaigns. I've also seen it tank performance on others. So I don't have a categorical thumbs up, thumbs down on it. And I think that it's something that you should just test. This is easy to do either through campaign experiments is probably the easiest way to do an A/B in real time. If you don't like campaign experiments, you can do before, after, and turn your current campaign on eCPC. I would prefer the experiment piece just because it's a little bit truer since it'll be performance over the same date range, but 100% test it. If it works, let it go. If it doesn't work, turn it back off. Similar audiences piece, I think that that's something that is easy to do, and I think that you should do it in certain ways. It's easy to layer as an observation layer in the audiences tab of the interface on your search campaigns or even your display campaigns, just as observation, not targeting, which means that anybody who is already searching for your keywords that is part of that audience, that data will be broken out on a different line and will let you be able to see performance a little bit differently. You can then bid up, bid down for that audience specifically. That, in my mind, is a no-brainer. If you're just trying to target the similar audience, just wholeheartedly, either targeting just them on the GDN or targeting just them on search, I would say same kind of thing with the GDN mobile stuff. Maybe dip your toe in the water, but as far as an observation layer on search, absolutely do it. It's not going to hurt a thing, and you'll only have more tools to play with.
Superb. Well, that just about takes us up to the end of our 13th episode. Just time for an actionable tip from each of our guests. So related to or not necessarily related to what we have been discussing today. So let's go with Steve first. What's your actionable tip, Steve?
I like to keep an eye on my competitors. I'll use a Chrome extension called Visual Ping. And
actionable tip kind of comes into the idea that you guys have an entire the paid advertising blog that each of the platforms has. AdWords has one, Bing has one, Facebook, LinkedIn, I think Pinterest has one, I think Twitter has one, and subscribe to them. Every time a new announcement goes live, here's what you're supposed to know, and then you can wait a little bit for either the Semrush podcast or other blogs to be able to cover it so you can get more in-depth detail, but that will kind of be your first warning that things are changing.
Superb. So if you find one of those blog posts, don't email Michelle because she's already read it. So she's okay.
I've got it.
You can find Michelle over at clicksmarketing.com, and that's clicks with an X. And I've been your host, David Bain. You can also find me over at digitalmarketingradio.com, and that's radio with an R. We'll be recording the next episode 14 of Search Marketing Scoop at the same time, same place at the Semrush YouTube channel on Wednesday, the 22nd of August. That's in 2 weeks' time, where my guests are scheduled to be Lucas Zelezny from Uswitch and Elizabeth Marsden from Commerce Hub. In the meantime, thanks not only to Michelle and Steve for this episode, but also to you for tuning in. If you like what you heard, subscribe to the audio podcast. So head over to searchmarketingscoop.com and find the link there to your preferred Apple or Android flavor of podcatcher. If you are already a Search Marketing Scoop audio podcast subscriber, tell us what you think. So a rating and review inside your podcast app would be much appreciated. Until we meet again, be fantabulous and do one thing that scares you. Adios.